our very special guests, the creators of the Museum of Broadway, Julie Boardman and Diane Nicoletti. I tip my hat and say they are one singular sensation, and we wonder, are they as far out as the plays we saw? Starting with The Far Country by Lloyd Suh. It chronicles the Chinese attempts at entering America during the Chinese Exclusion Act hurdle. Luckily, the San Francisco earthquake gave them an excuse to not have the necessary papers or witnesses. They could be dead or gone. G finagles the government to let him go back to China and return with his son because he is a U.S. citizen who was born here. Once in China, he approaches a poor family and offers to take her son Moon Get to America with all expenses paid in return for him working in his laundry to pay off the debt. One caveat is that he has to give up his name and take his. What is more important, keeping one's name and ancestors or finding a better life to support his impoverished mother? Thus begins a vicious cycle of, in a way, paying it forward with very treacherous strings. Then it's Moon Get's turn to bring back someone from China. This time it is for a wife. The trouble is that machinations alone are not very interesting after a while. We never see the hard work done in the laundry or something to break up the story more. It got more interesting in the second act with the interchange between Yuan and Moon Get. This is a very important part of American history that reflects on the hardships immigrants faced trying to enter America. And the same thing is happening today at the Mexican border, but I'm giving this one a mixed face.
In Dennis Johnson's Des Moines, a white middle-aged Polish-American Catholic couple hosts an evening of drinking depth charges and singing karaoke, enabling a group of troubled souls to temporarily escape their miseries. And including in their miseries is a botched anesthesia attempt during a sex change operation, imminent death, a woman who seems to be grieving for her husband, but might be ready for a new affair, a priest who would like to put on makeup. I mean, it's a really odd collection of people in an odd play that, while I was watching it, seemed to be kind of going nowhere, and I didn't really understand it. But it coalesced a bit more the further I got away from it. Although I still wouldn't recommend it to anyone except for the really great performers, including Joanna Day and Michael Shannon. Yeah, I gave it mixed faces minus, which maybe I should up a little bit, but I just didn't enjoy it while I was watching it at all.
I know. I mean, I guess you'd say it's about survival in the face of random occurrences.
Using alcohol and being in a group to get by.
Yeah. Well, again, to get by, to survive. So it's their Dennis Johnson's way of coping with survival, I guess. Anyway.
So today we're joined by the Museum of Broadway co-founders Julie Boardman and Diane Nicoletti. Thank you both for being here. For those who might not be aware, the Museum of Broadway is a newly opened institution to the Theater District in New York City, highlighting artifacts from previous shows, history of Broadway, how to get a show up and running, and the makeup and script and all the people that come together to make that possible.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you again for hopping on. I guess I wanted to start and kick a question over to you and ask, what is it that you want visitors to walk away from after visiting the Museum of Broadway?
Yeah, I think, we want them to just have a lot of fun. There's never been a place in New York, let alone Times Square, that just kind of celebrates all things Broadway. We want them to have a great time, have fun.
I'm curious about how this project came together. I'm sure it's been a long journey for you. If you're able to speak to the story behind that.
Yeah, well, it stemmed from an idea that Julie had, and that was about 5 years ago. She was having a conversation with a friend, and the question was raised as to why isn't there a museum of Broadway or a Broadway museum? And it kind of stopped everyone in their tracks, as it's that hidden obvious, like it's crazy that there hasn't been one that actually has been created. And so we were having drinks one night and she brought it up, and I come from the experiential world. And we just started brainstorming if we were to approach it and if we were to build it, how we would go about it, and what we'd want to see in it and who we would need to collaborate with and partner with. And that's sort of how the idea sprung 5 years ago. And then it's been quite the journey of multiple steps, multiple conversations, a wonderful, really comprehensive team that has worked on this project, from anyone from the creative team to the curatorial team to our marketing team. So many different components to make this happen. So it was, it just sort of started with the idea, and then it started to grow.
With thousands and thousands of Broadway shows to choose from, how did you choose which ones to do, how far back to go, and what was the most difficult one to put together?
Yeah,
Oh, those are
Julie.
sure. Those are great questions. Yeah, when we were, coming up with the idea and kind of fine tuning, what it might look like, I think it could have been approached in a lot of different ways, right? There's so much history to even like begin to choose from. And we ended up settling around this idea that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. So had all these people not pioneered and broken ground and taken risks and tried new things like along the way, we wouldn't actually have the art form we have today. And so if you look at the history through that lens, it starts to paint a picture that we thought was really fun to tell. And so, we decided to go as far back as theater goes in New York. So we started in the 1700s. And then it goes all the way through till today. But before you get to the timeline, you start in present day. So you see in this room, we call it the Playbill room, that it's everything that's currently running on Broadway that day. And so we're constantly changing things in and out as shows, announce and they close. And, so that room is always like up to date. And then you walk through this door, it says, let's start at the very beginning to kind of like level set you. And you walk into the map room, which it basically tells the history of the theaters in New York City. So they started in the financial district where people actually settled and migrated north to Times Square, which was then Longacre Square and was renamed Times Square. And we go through this history in about 4 minutes through a projection map video. And comes to life. It's very fun and colorful and bright, and you get that dose of history. And then you start walking the timeline. And as you walk the timeline, there are traditional timeline kind of walls that have, plays, musicals, these groundbreaking moments that have happened, all kind of organized around that idea that we were talking about before. And then when you get to a show that really changed the landscape of Broadway or brought in a new audience, changed the form, pushed us forward in a really like meaningful landmark kind of way, there's a room that's dedicated to it. So it's designed by either an artist or a Broadway designer. And then you go back to the timeline, then you'll continue and there'll be another room like that. So Showboat, there'll be another timeline. Then you get to Oklahoma. And when you get to these rooms, you're walking through a cornfield for Oklahoma, but it's coupled with the historical artifacts and things you would think to see in a museum. There's a great interview with Agnes DeMille there talking about the Dream Ballet, more timeline. So that pattern kind of repeats itself until you get to present day. And then you knock on a stage door and you go backstage into how do you make a Broadway show and kind of what are all those jobs that you could do? You don't have to be an actor. Most people, they know the final product, but they don't realize all the years and blood, sweat, and tears that go into making a show. And so that's designed by David Rockwell. And then you go into, we have a special exhibit that will rotate. Right now it's around Al Hirschfeld's work. And then you exit back into the gift shop, which has things from all current running shows. We have a shop within a shop for Hirschfeld. We're selling Broadway Cares ornaments and a lot of holiday things right now. We have a ton of books and, just general Museum of Broadway merchandise, Broadway merch. It's really fun. And even in there, just to tie in the history, we have, artifacts and kind of that idea. We have the chandeliers from the Great Comet. That's like our lighting in the gift shop. So it's pretty fun, and lots of color and sparkle and sequins and kind of that razzle dazzle of Broadway.
So much attention to detail. And I didn't even realize, even from the minute you walk into the gift shop, that you're being welcomed with actual set design. I'm curious about your favorite part of the museum. I know probably it's like asking to pick your favorite finger, since you've poured so much into everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that each of the different, it's nice to see how people gravitate to different rooms based off of, what they're into or what their mood is that particular day, because we have some that are like really light and colorful, others that are a little more serious, others that are more actual, if you will, like more, specific to recreating elements of a set, versus others are a little bit more abstract. I personally, in terms of artifacts, I love the Ziegfeld Follies costumes. I think it's just amazing that they've been preserved since the early 1900s, and they were found in a box in the New Amsterdam Theater, and voila, here they are. It's just kind of an unreal story in some ways. And they're so colorful and vibrant, and the beading is just really impressive to see that up close. And then in terms of rooms, I mean, love them all. Because Phantom of the Opera was the very first show that I ever saw, I have like a personal, connection experience, if you will, to Phantom. So that is emotionally impactful to me. And in that room, we have this deconstructed chandelier where we have over 13,000 crystals that represent the number of performances that Phantom, has run and will run on Broadway. And if you look at it one way, it's just these crystals. And if you look at it the other way, it reveals the mask. And so it just has, a couple meanings to that art installation. We worked with this lovely German installation artist who created it in Germany, shipped it over, spent 2 weeks actually hanging it up. So there's a lot of, true artwork, both in terms of the Broadway artifacts as well as sort of the care that went into these installations as well.
And hats off to Julie Boardman and Diane Nicoletti from the Museum of Broadway. And we had such an amazing interview with them that we are breaking it up so we don't have to edit any of it out. So you will see all of it in the future shows coming up. And go there so that you can see what we're talking about. Sarah Rule's Becky Nurse of Salem is about Becky Nurse, the ancestor of Rebecca Nurse, who was one of the women burned as a witch during the Salem witchcraft trials. She's a tour guide in the Salem Museum and has a tendency to go off topic with her own facts about the trial and the characters involved that might shock you. That is a problem. She is always getting in trouble for her language and salient points that are not high school friendly. Naturally, this concerns the director. Becky commiserates at the bar where Bob, her old high school sweetheart, works. Everything in her life is falling apart. She's worried about her granddaughter, her job, her finances. In desperation, she goes to a witch recommended by Stan, a night hotel manager. Will the witch solve all her problems or make the situation worse? Sarah Rule is one of my favorite playwrights. She gets the human condition and turns it into funny, poignant, and devastating plays. And it helps when you have such a phenomenal cast, from recent Tony winner Deirdre O'Connell to Thomas J. Ryan in 2 small justice enforcing parts. Miss O'Connell, in all her chaotic splendor, has a certain charm that really doesn't need to be augmented by witchcraft. Bernard White's Bob is that rare find, a totally decent guy who toils away at a life that could have been so different if he had just not danced with the wrong person at a crucial time. Tina Banko's Shelby as a director of the museum may appear cold and heartless, but she is just trying to do the right thing as much as anybody else. and Julian Sanchez's stand is deceptively suspect, but there are inner depths to him. Alicia Crowdsgale is under pressure from generations of women who made bad choices. Will she be just another one? And Thomas J. Ryan adds gravitas to compassion with law enforcement. Rebecca Teichman directs this with empathetic nuances that make even the less sympathetic characters likable. Becky Nurse Salem will put you under its spell and make you appreciate history and its treatment of people in a different way. Happy Face Plus.
In Adrienne Kennedy's Ohio State Murders, an African-American writer, Suzanne Alexander, is giving a lecture during the early 90s at Ohio State University, in which she talks about her experience there as a student from 1948 to 1952, and why there is so much violent imagery in her writings. Although she was a very bright student, she couldn't be an English major because of the prejudice at the time. One of her young English instructors, however, thought her writing was brilliant. She had an affair with him, and he seemed to be a very strange man. He got her pregnant, but wouldn't really acknowledge that. And later, one of her daughters was murdered. She stayed around to try to figure out who might have done it. It's a really harrowing tale. And, the more you stick with it, the more harrowing it gets. I saw it years ago in a production as a one-person show. And this Broadway version features different performers playing the various characters that she mentions. They're all really good, especially Bryce Pinkham as the young professor, but I think it gets in the way of the momentum of the tale and sort of destroys a bit the intensity of this woman's experience. I liked the sort of chasm that the backstage presents and the constant snow, which sort of is making us very cold and think about death. But, and I thought Audra McDonald is wonderful as usual. I'd give it a happy face, but I did like the earlier one-person version of it better.
Dylan Thomas's A Child's Christmas in Wales lovingly recalls his childhood Christmas back in Wales with his large family and cousins, with the food, his mother, the importance of the postman, the magic of playing outside in the snow. In the Irish Reps version, music was added that contributed to the mood of the piece, sung by the very talented cast of Dan Mack as Dylan Thomas, who basically narrated his recollections, Kyle Kwanka as the youngest and cutest of the ensemble, who still had all the enthusiasm that Christmas brings. Ali Ewell, Carrie Conte, Ashley Robinson, J. Aubrey Jones rounds out the ensemble with glorious harmonizing voices. They sit most of the time and sing beautiful Christmas songs, with some written by Charlotte Moore, such as Take My Hand, Tomorrow's Christmas, and Walking in the Snow, and the perennial favorite God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, and a traditional Welsh lullaby, All Through the Night, and many more. It's a very relaxing and enjoyable show. Actors sing well, and they are dressed in colorful clothes, and the spirit of Christmas is very much present. Happy Face.
If you haven't gotten yourself over to New World Stages to see Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish with English supertitles, you must. It's playing a return limited engagement through January 1st. And if you're unfamiliar with this musical, Fiddler on the Roof, or in this production, Fiddler auf dem Dach, is a story of a milkman named Tevye residing in a village of Anatevka. He struggles with preserving his Jewish values and traditions while his daughters wish to get married. After a destructive raid, Russian soldiers eventually forced Tevye and the villagers of Anatevka to flee their home in a story all too familiar to the Jewish people. This was one of the most moving and beautiful shows I've ever seen. And while the show and story have always been great, seeing it performed in Yiddish made it better. Yiddish is the language that the villagers of Anatevka would have spoken, what my great-grandmother, who lived in a real Ukrainian shtetl, herself spoke. I saw my own grandfather's journey fleeing Nazi Germany in this production, and I found myself fully engrossed with no language barrier present. I had to even make a conscious effort to blatantly ignore the projected English and Russian supertitles and simply just watch the actor's performance. The production features much of the original cast from its previous runs at Stage 42 and the Museum of Jewish Heritage, many of whom did not previously speak Yiddish. Even if you've seen the show previously, whether in English or in Yiddish, it's a worthwhile revisit. And the timely return of this production could not be more relevant with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and rampant anti-Semitism. Yeah, while I'd previously seen the show, I actually took my grandfather in the past during its run at Stage 42. At that production, he cried himself into a puddle, and I'd never seen him cry before, even when visiting Yad Vashem, his synagogue in Berlin, funerals. So obviously this production has always been very moving, but I felt myself even more engrossed this time around. It's a moving and tear-jerking show. Just run and see it.
Almost Famous, Cameron Crowe's movie has been now turned into a musical with Cameron Crowe doing the books and lyrics and Tom Kitt doing the music and lyrics. And it's directed by Jeremy Herron. And I have Lisa to talk about this one because this was her life. She was a platonic band-aid for the Ramones. So she gets this movie better, that play, everything better than anyone. So take it away, my expert.
Okay. In the early 70s, I lived in Arizona. A lot of bands came through. It was a small city at that point, Phoenix. It was pretty easy to find out where the bands were playing and staying. So my friends and I would always go hang out with the bands at their hotels and motels, but never do anything with them. So when the movie Almost Famous opened, I went and saw it, and it just hit home on every level. So I was really excited to hear that they were going to make a play of it,
Musical.
but a musical. But I also wasn't sure how they were going to translate it
off.
to the stage
With music.
with music, exactly. And I have to say, they didn't really do a very good job. The best music in the entire play were the snippets and the full takes of the originals from the early 1970s. I mean, you had T-Rex, Humble Pie, Elton John. The original music was sort of schmaltzy, but not in a good way. Unfortunately, the actress who played Penny Lane was okay, but there was no way she could have topped Kate Hudson. None of the actors really stood out for me as having a personality that would make them either seem like they needed to be followed or they would be welcomed as followers. It didn't work. And unfortunately, that's, I think, why the play is closing months earlier than it was originally scheduled to, on January 8th. I gave it a sideways
Mixed
face.
Yeah. Penny Lane was played by Solea Pfeiffer. And sorry, it's hard to see, it's so dark in here. Russell Hammond was played by Chris Wood. Jeff Beebe was played by Matt Bittner. And let's see,
William
was Casey Likes, and the mom was Anika Larson.
She was great.
Oh, and you love Lester Bangs, played by,
yes, how could I forget?
By Rob Coletti.
The Lester Bangs performance was incendiary, and it was spot on. I read Cream magazine when I was a teenager, and that guy was Lester Bangs. Fat, irascible, whip smart. He was the best thing about the play, by far.
Musical.
So
anyway, now it's my turn. So see, I had none of this. So I mean, to me, I was seeing this as a newbie. Yeah, I knew some of the music, but this is Lisa's soundtrack. It's mine too, but I'm like, I was Stones, Cat Stevens, Jim Croce. So I recognize those songs. But what happened was, he's a 16-year-old kid who gets a chance to write for the Rolling Stones. And he's following this band called Stillwater. And they were so good. I turned to Lisa. I said, is that a real band, Stillwater? Because it could have been. I mean, to me, they were very realistic. And
they weren't. It was an amalgam of several early 70s bands, including one called Sweetwater.
Well, see, again, she knows I don't. So to me, I was just taking this at total face value, and I loved it. I had a grand old time. I enjoyed it, and best of all, there wasn't that much flashing lights. So as my poor vertigo self, I could actually enjoy this and watch most of it. It was like the only bad part was like this electrical scene in an airplane when they were like, a big thunderstorm and everything. But it was a love story. It was a love story to music. It was a love story to being a teenager. It was a mom's love story for her kid. So, I mean, I love this. It was sappy and wonderful. And I thought all the performances were great. And I enjoyed the choreography. I enjoyed everything about this. So for me, maybe it's good to not have lived this life and see and know anything about it and seen the movie. Then you'll have a happy face like me, because I give it a happy face. Now, in the meantime, coming up between December 31st, which is today, and our next show, January 14th, we have some festivals going on. Our very, very favorite one that the entire high drama people goes crazy over. This is our Christmas present. The Origins First Irish. It starts January 9th, goes to the 31st. It's all over town. One of the offerings is Fish Amble, Bina and I. That's our favorite. And at the public, they're doing their Under the Radar Festival from January 4th to the 22nd. And then every Monday, there's this political satire called Why is the Government in My Soup? And that's going on till February 13th. And Exponential Festival is going on at the Brick from January 4th to February 8th. Then there's a lot of stuff going on at here, like the Prototype Opera. And don't forget the Gilbert and Sullivan Players are back with HMS Pinafore until January 8th. And Soho Playhouse has several offerings from the Fringe Encore series. And Theater for the New City is doing Darkness After Night Ukraine on January 8th onward. And some breaking news. Stomp, after 29 years, is closing January 8th. And I took Alfie when he was 4, 25 years ago. So for Kids Night Out, only time I ever did it. So there's a lot more going on. This is just a smattering of what to expect in 2023. So still, theater is strong. Have a happy, happy, happy New Year.